I am the Director of Digital Media for Minnesota Public Radio, and I want to welcome you to the one and only session at this conference devoted to search engines, Outwitting the Algorithms. For those of you who are following along on Twitter, the code is ONA SEO, and we're going to go ahead and jump right in. We have three great speakers, two presentations. The way we're going to do it is we're going to take the presentations. There's about 25 minutes of presentation, and then we'll have lots of opportunities for questions. So the other note is we do have to be out of here at 12:30. Tom's going to come back in the back, so get your questions up early, and we need to use the microphone, all right? So the first speakers are Gradiva Cousin and Jennifer Grappone, who are the founding partners of Gravity Search Marketing and the co-authors of Search Engine Optimization in Hour a Day, which reviewers on Amazon describe as the best SEO book, the top SEO book for web entrepreneurs, and a solid foundation for long-term success. They are the perfect right brain, left brain match. Gradiva brings her experiences in civil engineering and physics to help facilitate communications between techies and non-techies. And Jennifer began her career as a writer, producer, and video director who, for those of us who come from a writing background, believes that good writing and style go hand in hand with good SEO. So please join me in welcoming Jennifer and Gradiva to the stand.
Hi, I'm Jennifer Grappone. I'm a partner at Gravity Search Marketing, and I'm based in Los Angeles. Better? Okay. I'm Jennifer Grappone, and I'm a partner at Gravity Search Marketing, and I'm based in Los Angeles. Can I take this off the stand? No, I can't. So SEO is a really, really big topic, and our time is limited, so I'm going to focus on kind of a subset, the things that I think are most important to you. And the first thing I'm going to focus on is a very brief getting you up to speed on the state of the search engine algorithm. And then we're going to move on to some common problems that Gradiva and I noticed in our review of news sites, things that we think you can fix with a relatively low investment of labor and that might have a significant improvement for you in the search results. But before I do move on, I do think it's worth mentioning that in case you didn't know this, and you probably do, that the search engine ranking algorithm, the sets of rules and criteria that determine how the pages are ranking in the search engines, it is a hidden secret entity. This is not made public for obvious reasons. People don't want to, the search engines don't want people to unfairly game the system. So what we do know about the search ranking algorithm, the SEO industry as a whole has come to an understanding based on lots of experience and testing and the little bits of information that we can get from the official search engine people. And I'm also going to focus mostly on Google because it's my guess that you will care mostly about Google. So let's look at a typical search engine results page. What we're seeing here is the main Google search results for the search term Iran protests. And what you're seeing here are results, and every one of these is algorithmically driven. But you're seeing separate sets of search results. Each one of these sets is following separate criteria in order for separate ranking criteria. So ignoring paid ads, which are kind of their own animal, where the criteria is largely money, what you're seeing here are vertical search results that are coming from news.google.com. Obviously, those are being integrated in. Video search results coming from video.google.com. And I'm sure you've seen local or maps results that are coming in from a different set of data. But the vast majority of Google search results are these organic listings, which are the straight-up text listings with the clickable top line. And the difference between the organic search results and these vertical search results, which you will also hear referred to as universal search results by SEOs, is that you... Sorry?
Folks, you don't have to sit on the floor. We got lots of seats up here. Come on up front.
So the difference between organic search results and these vertical search results is that for the most part, and generally speaking, you have to actively do something in order to be seen in the vertical search results. And generally that means something like creating and properly formatting and submitting an XML sitemap. But for the organic search results, you can get them passively simply by having a website that the search engines can actually see and read. We have lots of answers for you, and you'll have lots of questions, but right now I'm going to focus on the organic search results and how they are determined. Wow. Our graphics did not come through appropriately, but nope, it's okay. It's cool. So there are hundreds of factors by which the search engines determine their ranks. Hundreds of them, and we don't know what all of them are. We might even know what lots of them are, but the SEO industry as a whole might have different ideas about which one is weighed more heavily than the other and which one is more important than another. But I think most SEOs would agree that these are the biggies. These are the ones that tend to matter the most and the things that we care a lot about. So the search engines are looking at on-page factors, things that you can manipulate relatively easily, things like where are you putting your keywords, what words have you put in the places that the search engines weigh the most. And there are things that you can't control quite as easily, things like how old is your domain. For example, in Google, an older domain is considered to be a more credible domain, and an older domain may have a search advantage over a brand new domain. And in case you weren't aware of this, another very, very important factor in the search ranks in the algorithm is links that point to your site. So if you have a lot of high-quality links coming to your site, links that Google deems as high quality, then you are very likely to get an advantage in the ranks. And Google looks at what's pointing to your site, and it even looks at kind of the vast linkscape of sites that are linking to each other, and eventually the links make their way to your site. So Google's taking all of that into account, and links can affect your ranks. And I'll talk a little bit more about those in a bit. But there are also handicaps. Very commonly, sites are not optimized 100% for search, and some of these handicaps are pretty obvious. If the search engines can't read the text on your site, that's going to be a disadvantage in the search rankings. But that's different from penalties. And for legitimate sites, penalties are actually a pretty rare thing. And by penalty, I mean you might be devalued in the search engine rankings, or you might be completely removed from the results. And if you were doing something that was in such violation of the spam rules that you got penalized, you would already know about it. So it's not very common for legitimate sites to be penalized. Okay, good. Those X's did show up. So when we looked at the online news sites that we looked at, there were some very common things that we considered disadvantages that were very typical of your average news site that's run by a content management system. And some of these things you can't do anything about. For example, you can't help the fact that your content is fresh. News content, fresh news content is an advantage for news sites. It just happens to be a disadvantage in typical organic search ranks. But some of these things you can do something about. So let's talk about those. The first thing is the HTML title. This is the text that shows up in the top of the browser bar. And it is also important because it is the top line, the top clickable line, almost always, of your search result. And most SEOs would agree that the HTML title is the most important place to put your keywords because the search engines rate this very heavily. And so what typically happens on a news site, what typically happens is that your article title is dynamically inserted into your HTML title. So what you're seeing at the top of the article is also what you're seeing at the top of the browser window. So if that article title happens to be well optimized, if you've researched your keywords and you've placed them in the article title, then your page and your site, it's going to be better optimized. You'll have an advantage. But we understand that there are lots of good reasons why you would not want to optimize your title for whatever reason. You don't want to keyword stuff it. Reasons of quality, reasons of clarity. And so if that's something that you don't want to do all the time, we would actually recommend divorcing your HTML title from your article title in your content management system. And this is something that it's common. It's relatively easy to do. You'll have to talk to your developer about it. But what you want is the opportunity to overwrite your HTML title for a given page whenever you so desire to keyword optimize it. Here's an example of an article title that I saw on a site that, it was compelling. If I was on this site, I would definitely want to click through and read the article. But as a searcher, it's very unlikely that I would ever find this article because it doesn't really contain any commonly used keywords. And so I wrote 3 different possibilities for the HTML title. Keeping the article title the same, you could rewrite the HTML title to include keywords. And here you're seeing keywords such as local news, location names, police blotter is a frequently searched word. And so these things can be modified without modifying your article title if you have the right technology in place. And on a similar note, the text in your URL, if there are keywords in your URL, you will have a slightly better chance of ranking for those keywords. And this is another common thing we saw. There's always some kind of, or very frequently, some kind of dynamic URL with variables, article ID equals, and then a string of numbers. And that's simply a disadvantage. And there are tools, another very common thing that's always often used in e-commerce sites, called a URL rewriter, which would give you the opportunity to rewrite your URLs to contain keywords, we call them pretty URLs, human readable, search engine readable, and separated by characters between the words, which would give the search engines just another clue about the content of your site, and you may improve your ranks if you can improve your URLs. And just because I'm here, in case you were wondering, we get this question still a lot. The meta keywords tag is an SEO element that had some influence maybe 10 years ago. It tends to be the main thing that people have heard about. It has absolutely no influence in the search engine, so you can leave it blank, you can leave it off, you can forget all about it.
Is that a surprise? That comes as a shock?
Yeah, ignore. Well,
I shouldn't say absolutely no. I mean, there's some debate over some of the
it's not going to hurt you. It's certainly not going to hurt you, but if you're wasting a lot of time on it, that's a disadvantage.
Right, it's not worth your time. It would be better spent doing something else.
Folks, can we hold the questions and take them at the mic, because then folks will be able to hear them. Thanks. No, we're going to do the questions at the end.
Sorry.
Sorry, there's a lot of noise in the hallway, so everyone having a hard time still hearing you.
Turn the general volume up.
Can you just turn the volume on the microphone?
Can you help me figure that out? Sorry. I could also shout. Is that better? Okay.
Just.
It's fine. I thought I was. Is this better? Sorry, guys.
She's a fabulous singer too, by the way.
I can project. Okay. So let's talk about duplicate content, which is a very commonly observed problem in sites that are generated by a content management system. And what I mean by duplicate content, when I look at the news sites, it's common that I'm going to see an article, and depending on how I navigate to that article, I will see different things in the URL. So if I click on the breaking news navigation and get to that article that way, breaking news might be in the URL, or most emailed or most popular. If I click on that and see the article that way, the URL will be different based on how I got to it. It's a very common scenario. And it's a disadvantage. Any human looking at this page through various URLs is going to say, hey, this is the same article. It's clearly the same article. But But the search engines, in fact, are looking at these as 3 separate URLs, and in fact are counting them as 3 separate pages that are competing against each other. And so the big disadvantage, as we talked about, inbound links pointing to your page will potentially help your page rank higher. So what you're going to get if you have 3 identical pages with different URLs is you're going to get the links coming from the world that are going to point to 3 separate URLs, and you'll have 3 relatively lower power pages. Whereas what you really want is all of the links that are pointing to this content to point to one very higher power page that has a better chance of ranking. So very fortunately, there's a new tool that we have at our disposal, which kind of just came into use last spring. And it's called the Canonical Tag. And this is simply a tag that you place in the head of your page. Let's say I have 3 identical URLs, 3 identical pages available at URL A, URL B, and URL C. I can actually put this tag in all 3 of those pages and specify on all 3 of those tags that URL A is the canonical or the real or the preferred URL for all of this duplicate content. And so this is something that you might be able to do manually on an article-by-article basis, or better yet, talk to your developer about doing this dynamically so you never have to think about it again. But one very important word to the wise is that please read up on this and make sure you're implementing it correctly, because it's very easy to accidentally misimplement this and have the search engines ignore the page altogether. But if you're doing it properly, then it's actually very beneficial. And so how many of you are familiar with the fact that links can improve your ranks? Okay, so quite a few. So the thing about links, they're very, very important, and one of the reasons that they're important is that you can't easily manipulate this. The search engines see every link that comes to your site as a vote, and so the thing to keep in mind is that not all links will pass authority and help your ranks. Links might bring you traffic, which is great, but they won't all help you in the eyes of Google. For example, Google has clearly stated that paid links, and this is whether they're labeled as sponsored links or not, will not pass authority to your site. So if you're paying for a link exchange service, it's very likely to be a waste of money, because of the common knowledge is Google will eventually find out, and those links won't help your ranks at all. And also the no-follow tag is a commonly used tag that you'll see in lots of different sites. And I think the ones that you care most about as newsmakers would be Facebook and Twitter links. Twitter links are all marked as no-follow. They're all tagged with the no-follow attribute. So while they are great for bringing traffic to your site, they will not directly help your ranks. And Facebook, we believe, are not tagged with no-follow. And if they are not behind a login, if it's a corporate fan page, Facebook links are likely to help your ranks. But any page that's behind a login, the search engines don't fill in logins and get behind them to see what those links are, so those won't help your ranks. So links, great for traffic. These are great for traffic. And Twitter links will not directly influence your ranks. We're moving fast. Okay, so here's Gradiva.
Hi, can everybody hear me? Yes. I will try to speak loud. So Jennifer talked to you about strategic placement of keywords and where you can put keywords in order to potentially rank better for them. Maybe you're wondering, well, what keywords are people actually searching for? How do I know that this content that I'm going to put on my page is actually going to match up with something that people are actually trying to find? The good news, I think, for this audience is that a very large proportion of searches, 80%, roughly, are considered informational. This is people seeking answers to questions, seeking information, of course definitely seeking news. So that's great for you because your sites are providing the answers to these questions. I'm going to very quickly go through several tools that are free. They're easily accessible online. Many of you probably know several of these tools already that will tell you what are the actual popularity levels of various keywords. The first tool is Google Trends at www.google.com/trends. One of my favorite tools, and I'm sure many or most of you have used or seen this tool before. It will show you at any given time a list of hot trends, which are current up-and-comers or search queries that have suddenly had some sudden change or increase in their popularity, and it's updated hourly. So it's a really fun tool. I have the RSS feed for this right on my homepage and look at it constantly, and it keeps you amazingly well informed because people immediately search for stuff the second it happened. Like, even I was watching the debates and I saw these hot trends changing during the debates based on what people were talking about in the debates. It's pretty interesting. But even more useful than this tool, really, is that Google Trends allows you to enter your own terms of choice and look at the trends in search volume popularity for those terms. You can compare the relative popularity of two terms, and in this example I've entered Rush Limbaugh and Glenn Beck to see the flow of popularity over time for those two searches. Glenn Beck is higher right now. You can look at terms at words over a long term, back to I think 2004, and see the seasonality of various searches, which can be interesting. You might wonder when people start searching for Christmas. Is it in October? Is it in August? So you can learn about that, and you can also see if the popularity of something, of a term, has recently dwindled. Maybe that some event happened 2 weeks ago and had a spike. Is it continuing to garner searches, or is it completely dropped off? So very, very useful tool, Google Trends. And I should mention, this is a kind of Google-heavy presentation. I am going to talk about a few non-Google tools, but Google provides really incredible and useful tools, so that's what I'm mostly going to be talking about. Google Insights for Search is a similar tool to Google Trends. It allows you to type in a term, a word, or multiple words, and see what the trending and popularity for those searches is. It gives you some control over web search. In this upper right-hand corner, you can filter by people searching the web, people searching only in news, geographic locations. I actually don't usually use those filters because I'm looking at US-wide, but you might want to look at more specific locations, and within categories. But the most useful thing about Google Insights is scroll down at the bottom of the screen. It provides you a list of top searches related to the term that you entered, and rising searches related to the term that you entered and over the time period frame that you specified. In this example, I've entered the word Newark, and you can see on the right side the general top popular terms, pretty common or pretty obvious choices: Newark Airport, Newark NJ, Newark DE. These are going to be the searches that have a consistent, ongoing popularity related to that word Newark. On the left side here, and this is over the past 7 days, I'm seeing some rising searches. The term Brick City has had a sudden increase in the number of searches, and this is the name of a movie, I believe, a documentary that's related to this city of Newark. Other searches, which I think might be related to students returning to school. Basically, this is giving you a window into what have people been searching for over the past 7 days. What has suddenly increased in interest relating to this word Newark. So if I was reporting, if I covered the city of Newark, I would certainly want to subscribe to this RSS feed and have it constantly showing me what are people thinking about relating to this locality. Of course, it doesn't have to be a location you enter. It can be any topic or any word. So you can enter the word automobile and see at any given time what are people recently what are these recent increased terms that people are searching for that are related to the word automobile. So it's a great tool. One more Google tool. This is the Google AdWords keyword tool. It is intended for, or was developed, I believe, for use by advertisers who are paying to show their paid ads alongside search searched keywords. But it is free and accessible to anyone, and you don't actually have to be an advertiser to use this tool. It has a publicly accessible URL, which is listed here. And in this example, you can enter your choice of keyword or keywords, and it shows you the actual volume of keywords, the one you've entered, as well as related or synonymous or similar terms. In this case, I entered the word Gavin Newsom, and I'm seeing the relative popularity of his name, misspellings of his name, as well as something like Gavin Newsom, like it or not, which some people are searching for. It's a quote of his, I guess. That might inspire me to write something about that quote, if I see that that's something people are interested in. So that's a pretty nitty-gritty tool. We use it a lot in our work. It might go a little far for content developers. We're very short on time, so I'm just going to run through a few other cool tools, which I think are kind of more fun and a little bit recreational. Yahoo Buzz is similar to Google Trends. It shows the 20 popular terms for I think for each day, and gives some statistics on what's rising and what's falling. Facebook Lexicon, I think, is a really cool and interesting tool. This is not showing search volume, it's showing usage volume. It displays how often a word is being used in Facebook status posts. So it's really more of a way of gathering a sense of sort of the zeitgeist out there. What are people talking about? I know this graph is really small, but it's an example that shows the word, I think, Iraq and economy, and you can kind of see economy jumped up. People suddenly started talking about it last September. Now it's died down, and they're sort of equal again. So you can really, it's a really interesting tool in my mind for seeing what words people are using. Twitter Stream Graphs is a Twitter visualization tool. There are a lot of really interesting Twitter visualization tools. You might want to try just searching for that if you're interested. This one I really like. It allows you to enter a word and see what other words people are using alongside that term in tweets, and you can see it over time. So I put in the word Philippines flood. I thought it was really interesting. You first saw a cluster of people with these kind of pragmatic, descriptive words, but then a couple days later you start seeing people using these more emotional words like sad and suffering and send help, combining with the word Philippines flood. So you can kind of see how people's usage of terminology is responding to the news event. I call this Slacker keyword research. I know that people are in a hurry. This is something you can do in 20 seconds, so I beg you to do it, which is just looking at what the search suggestions are. These are examples from Google and Yahoo. This is the pull down that will show up if you type in a search term, and it's the search engine's suggestions for other words that you may actually be looking for. We don't know exactly how this list is gathered, but we do know that it strongly correlates with the most popular searches. So in just a matter of seconds, you can get an incredibly quick snapshot of what some popular searches are around a subject. Also, it's kind of a snowball effect, because once something's on that list, then people start searching for it more. Okay, if even that is too much for you, which it might be, I'm just going to give you a little cheat sheet based on some of our experiences and observations in what people search for. Just some rules of thumb for article titles. And the reason I say this is for article titles is because, as Jen mentioned, very, very often in your CMS, your article title is going to feed into the HTML title. It may feed into the URL. It's very likely to be text that is clickable from other places on your site pointing to your article page. So it's a really smart place to include keywords. We suggest you use full first and last names, because people, especially with a common first name, that's not something people will be searching by. If you must only use one name, I suggest you use the last name. Using the numeric form for numbers, this is both more popular in search and it's also shorter, so it saves you precious space in your titles. The third bullet point is kind of a little bit hard to describe. I'm saying include a meaningful descriptor. You could also just basically say include keywords. If you have an article title, in this case I made up this example, maybe there's someone wrote a movie review and it's called Up Flies High. Doesn't actually contain any word like movie or review that's telling a search engine what this content actually is. If you took it out of context, it would be very hard for a machine to understand what this page is about. So I suggest, including something like the word movie review. And this is similar to Jennifer's example with police blotter or Madison local news, something that includes keywords. We suggest you avoid abbreviations and alternate spellings because this is not how people search, with one important exception being state names. People do indeed search with the shortened two-letter state abbreviations like NJ for New Jersey, so those are good things, good words to use. Including proper names and locations. Again, because this is how people search if they're looking for information. People know that the search engine isn't smart enough to understand if I type in shooting at bar, the search engine can't figure out what bar I'm talking about. So I'm going to enter in the name of the bar when I perform the search. So it would be great if your article also includes that name. And the last piece of advice I'm going to give is to include, if your content is watchable, includes video, which hopefully there's more and more happening. I strongly suggest you include the word watch in the title or subject line of your page, because this is a search term that has really increased almost stratospherically over the last few years, and I imagine it'll continue to increase, so it would be great if you could catch that wave. And that is the end.
Great.
I don't have the end. Well, we have a bunch. We're going so fast because we're leaving time for questions, but I think after Krishna. So, yes.
You said, it's obvious for movie review, Up Flies High, it will increase the results. Does it matter that movie review is first? Could it be Up Flies High and put movie review last?
So that's debatable, like so many things in the algorithm. There have been some recent studies, evidence. Maybe some Google people will just give us. There's been some recent studies that correlate, yes, words that are first in your title are doing a little better in ranks. That's just a correlation. We don't know for sure if it's a causation. But yeah, I probably would do that. I probably would try to put my keywords in front. But nobody knows for sure.
Thank you very much. That was great. And I know the time is tight, so we're going to move on. Remember, we're going to take questions at the end. If you have them, as soon as Krishna is done, head to the microphone. If you don't go to the microphone, all of the people watching out on the live stream can't hear it. All right. Our next speaker is Krishna Bhatt. He holds a PhD in computer science from Georgia Tech. He is the distinguished researcher at Google, where he leads a team developing Google's news product. For those of us in the room, he is the creator of Google News, which won the 2003 Webby Award for the news category. And in the same year, he received the 2003 World Technology Award for Media and Journalism. Please give a warm welcome to Krishna.
Thank you. This angle is kind of funny. So I'm here to talk about the other half of the equation. You heard a lot about what publishers can do in order to make their content competitive and effective, and I'm going to talk about what search engines do at the other end with the content that you guys produce, which is very valuable. So let me start by first presenting what Google News is, and then I'll tell you how it works. So firstly, Google's mission. Google's mission is to organize the world's information and make it universally accessible and useful. And you may have heard of this in a couple of places, but we take it very seriously inside Google because it provides a clear vision that has more to do with people and how they use information than about the market, right? It provides you something concrete to work with. And by world's information, we don't just mean online information, we also mean offline information, which might be in books, on satellite data, and so forth that we might want to bring online. And we also mean information in people's heads that they may want to someday put online, social networks and so forth. So Google News is in some sense this very same mission applied to news. So we want to make the world's information, which means every language, every country, every news organization, every story, which means a lot of content, which is why algorithms make a lot of sense. If you were just trying to organize the output of 10 newspapers, you wouldn't need an algorithm. When you have 25,000 newspapers, lots in different fonts and languages, it is a technical problem. So here's what Google News looks like these days. It's presented in a way that looks like a news page, but it's designed primarily as an access point to other newspapers, news sites. So each story has 7 links plus thousands more if you want to one click away. These go directly to the publisher site. And you also can search for content on Google News, but you can also search for content on Google Web Search. In some sense, both of these are equally effective. But in practice, if you know that there is a news article that you want to find, Google News will always look at the news content, whereas in Web Search will try to include news when it when it deems it fit, but may not always. We also have sections that are automatically organized, and we update the content periodically. Every 10 to 15 minutes, the whole page gets recomputed. All the content gets recomputed. It used to be that nothing would happen in those 15 minutes or 10 to 15 minutes, but lately we've started updating it almost minutely in small ways. One of the key goals here is to bring a variety of perspectives together and reporting from around the world so that people have a sort of a well-rounded understanding of issues, not just opinions and reporting from the part of the world they live in, but also from other parts of the world which might be quite distant and disagree with them, so that it helps educate people about what other people think and what's going on elsewhere. Not necessarily because they agree with them, but at least they don't operate with ignorance. So how does it actually work? We have a crawler, which finds every time a news article appears on your website or appears in your sitemap, we fetch a copy of that and we index it. We take it apart. And we understand where the article title lies and where the body lies. So even if your HTML title is generic, which would handicap you for web search, Google News is able to figure out where the article title is. That said, I think it's a good idea to put a meaningful HTML title in there. And also, we pay attention to the fact that sometimes the URL gets reused and new content comes in the same URL periodically. So we don't want to discourage you from doing that, but bear in mind that if you do that frequently, we may actually have an old copy of that URL. So we see all this content coming in from a variety of websites over time, and when I say we, I mean our algorithms. Our computers recognize that a set of these articles are in fact talking about the same story. We call this a story cluster. So in this case, the story cluster is about some stem cell research that happened in Korea, and it comes from different parts of the world. And by pulling together all of these articles, you're able to construct the display that I just showed you earlier. And the other thing that happens, it allows us to rank the story better. Intuitively, the more the content there is in the story, the more information there is in the story, the more valuable it is. So that brings us to ranking, right? We rank news primarily based on how important editors around the world think the story is. So a small story will be reported in a local paper. A few wires might pick it up, and there'll be copies of that, and that's all that'll happen. A big story will have lots of local, national, and international reporting, lots of follow-up reporting, and many, many copies of the wire stories, and so forth. So our computers can actually measure the amount of activity going on in a given story. And the reason they can do this is because they can bring together all the reporting on that story into one cluster. And that's how they're able to analyze this. So the first approximation, we rank news based on aggregate editorial interest. That is, in some sense, we are repeatedly conducting polls with all the editors in the world saying, what do you think is important right now? And we don't really do that. We just watch their publishing actions, and we make those inferences. So if editors are not allocating resources for this story, we can pick up on that, and it goes down on Google News, which is sort of the rational thing to do. Some people believe that a lot of our ranking is influenced by clicks. In fact, it isn't. So the story importance within a given edition, because we have so many different editions, is based on editorial interest, global and local interest. We obviously emphasize local editors much more, which is why the UK edition of Google News looks very different from the US edition of Google News, although they're both coming from the same collection of English news articles. The US edition is heavily influenced by what US editors are running. We pay attention to the placement on the newspaper front page. Excuse me. We try to infer the geography of the story. If the story is local, then we pay attention to that and emphasize it. We also obviously pay attention to freshness. So editorial interest 8 hours ago is not as interesting as editorial interest right now. So that's what determines which story is ranked above which other story on our headlines page. I'll talk about search in a few minutes. Article ranking within each of these clusters is a function of a number of factors. We pay attention to originality. We pay attention to freshness, right? So we can't keep showing you the same article all the time, partly because people might have read it, and partly because new updates may have come in. So we bias towards freshness. We also pay attention to the quality and expertise of the sources. So we pay attention to things like, how much content does it produce in this particular category, and are users happy with the source? Are they using it a lot? And also some web signals to understand the value of a source within a certain edition, within a certain section. So we might infer that ESPN is very good for US sports, not as much for US business, based on the volume of reporting that they do and how users perceive it. We also pay attention to the localness of the source. Often local sources have reporting that's tailored to that local public. So local here, I mean local to the user. And we also pay attention to citations within the story. If there is a canonical source that everybody's talking about, we pay attention to that. So then we create editions based by classifying content into geography and topic. So here's an article. It's really hard to read. And we pick up on keywords and section information to figure out that this is actually a business story, and the geography is the United States, specifically New York, and that helps us a lot in our ranking. So use the same algorithm to generate editions around the world for various different countries and so forth. Moving on to news search. So news search, the same corpus which is used to generate the headlines pages is also used for news search. So if you search for Al-Qaeda, you will get multiple stories. Each of them is, in fact, one collection of articles referring to one aspect of Al-Qaeda in this case. The first one is about Germany, and the second one is about a US drone. So how does this work? We have an index, very much like the web search index, that allows us to find all the articles that talk about Al-Qaeda, but we have information that tells us which story each article comes from, so which allows us to pull together all of the articles about a given story and show them together, right? So this allows us, in fact, to save users a lot of time by taking the search results and binning them into different topics, Al-Qaeda in Somalia, Al-Qaeda relating to Iran, Iraq, Israel, Western Europe, and so forth. So if you're mainly interested in Al-Qaeda's connection with Israel, you can skip over the other two and plunge into that. So it's a big time saver. Lastly, Google News also operates in universal search, as has been mentioned earlier. So in addition to the organic results which come from web search, the universal search block is a thing that Google News produces that gets a lot of traffic, and it doesn't show up all the time. In this case, Letterman was certainly in the news recently, so web search picked up on that and decided to prioritize the amount of news that they show, and therefore there was a big block at the top. iPhone is not necessarily a particularly hot topic right now, and in any case, there is a there's a canonical navigational result on the Apple site. So the news for iPhone is lower down in the page. These two examples are kind of interesting from the news industry point of view. In the first one, probably they were explicitly looking for news about Letterman, so that's where they went. In the second case, there are some users at least who came here to buy an iPhone or do something else with an iPhone, and they saw the news block at the bottom of the page and ended up clicking on it. So we converted people who are not looking for news into people who would actually click through to a news site, so in thus channeling traffic to news publishers. How does news search ranking works? To a first approximation is the same as headlines ranking, except one very important new factor has come in, which is relevance to the query. So if Al-Qaeda is mentioned in passing, in one article, in a big fat cluster, that does not mean that we should show that story. Clearly, the emphasis of that cluster is on something else. It's not on Al-Qaeda, it's on something else. Okay? On the other hand, if all the articles in the cluster are talking about Al-Qaeda, then it will rank very well. And further, within the cluster, there may be a breadth of reporting, and ones that sort of are significantly about the topic, and they mention it in the title, many occurrences in the body, and so forth, will influence the ranking of the article. But that said, there are other factors, the quality of the source, the freshness of the article, and so forth, that will cause, that'll also play a significant role here. So that's pretty much it. For further information, I invite you to go visit our news support site. This is the URL, and if you cannot find all the answers you want there, feel free to contact us. And on the web search front, we have a Webmaster Central page that allows you to find information regarding how to optimize for web search.
Can you go back to the other?
Yeah. And actually, I should introduce Linda from our news support team, who's sitting in the front here. If you have any specific questions about your website or whatever, feel free to catch her after the talk, and she'll be able to help you.
Great, thanks.
Okay, so we'll take questions. Line up. If you could just say your name and where you're from and ask your question as quickly as possible. We'll get through as many as we can. Remember, you need to go to the mic to ask your question. Thank you.
Hi, Sharon Mackless with Computer World. Some sites, including ours, are sharing content, so there are multiple copies of stories on across different sites within the company and outside. People seem to think that helps because the links come back. Other people think it hurts because there are too many copies of the same story floating around and the originator doesn't always get credit. Any thoughts on whether too many copies of the same story on different sites helps, hurts, or neutral?
Do you want to?
Who do you want to answer the question?
Web search or news search answer? News.
So having the same content in multiple sites doesn't necessarily improve things, because we treat one of them as the canonical and others as duplicates. So just the multiplicity of sites doesn't help. Now, we try to be smart about figuring out which is the canonical, and sometimes we might be getting it wrong. In other words, you might be getting somebody who's syndicating the content from you may be treated as a canonical, and there could be a couple of reasons why that happens. If you notice that somebody else is consistently showing up for your content, then please let us know, and we might be able to fix it. But we try to pay attention to who first publishes it, and what is the general stature of that publication to figure out who the canonical might be.
I want to add to that. That's pretty much the same thing we observed in web search, that they're looking for the he's saying canonical, sort of original source.
Hi, Amy Webb from Web Media Group, and I'm also on the ONA board. Krishna, I have an algorithm question for you. There are a bunch of new protocols. There's Google's PubSub, Hubbub out there. And I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about real-time web and how Google News may or may not be integrating those kinds of results into the news that you're aggregating.
Yeah, so on the one hand, we are trying to make sure that Google News, which is inherently a reactive thing that waits for other people to publish, is able to surface content that's really fast. So we've worked very hard in the last 9 months trying to reduce the time taken for us to produce a breaking story in the front page. But there's a lot more work to be done there. But there are obviously other sources of real-time information, blogs and microblogs being great examples of that. and we are actively thinking about ways in which that might play a role. Nothing to announce just yet.
How far off? Give us an idea.
4 months. I'm just kidding.
Next question.
Sergio Goldimer from Georgia Tech. We have heard a lot of tips for sometimes very unstructured news sites. So for Krishna, what will be your suggestions for the future? Let's think 3-5 years in the future in terms of how should be the news structured so it will be easily searchable. And if you have any suggestion on technology that we should use, RDF, semantic webs, all those things. And if those things, are you interested in that the newspapers will do those things, or you prefer to create your own algorithms and try to figure it out?
Yeah, so creating arcane formats is easy, getting people to adopt them is hard. This is sort of the lesson we've learned from a variety of things. So if there is an existing format that you can piggyback on, extending it is much easier than creating something brand new. That would be my preference. I mean, sitemaps offers a way for publishers to communicate effectively with search engines, giving lots of details, publication time, whether it's original or not, where it's syndication paths and so forth. So clearly, extending those would be my preference. And there could be more ambitious things one could think of, in how do you want to syndicate this content, how much you want to expose and so forth, and that requires more thought. And potentially these existing mechanisms might work, or potentially there might be a new protocol. But anyway, it needs to be industry-wide.
Hi, I'm Angela Pacenza with the Canadian Press. I'm wondering if you can talk a bit about corrections. From time to time, I know it's shocking, reporters make errors, and you want to take something down for legal reasons or whatnot. Are there sort of, can you speak to that?
Yeah, so if you update the article in place, we'll pick it up. If it's super important that we pick it up right away or you take it down, I think it's best to contact us, because there's no sort of automatic way for us to distinguish between an article being down temporarily because of some server error and you deliberately want to taking it down. I mean, if it stays down for sufficiently long, we will recognize that. But I think it's best for you to tell us if it's sort of for legal reasons you have to take an article down.
Hi, I'm Kim Moy, and I'm managing editor of the U.S. front page for Yahoo. Hi, Mike. I have a question, actually two-part question. You mentioned article ranking as based on originality, and I was interested in hearing how an algorithm can determine that. That was my first question. My second question also is I understand there's some movement afoot within Google to do more in the local news space, and I'm really interested in hearing about that as well.
So originality, we look for two things. One is the fact that this particular article, in fact, substantially overlaps with other articles, right? And we also pay attention to the fact that there's a tendency for certain sources to have a lot of content that is in fact duplicate, whereas other sources have distinguished themselves as being purveyors of original content. So sort of reputation for being original also plays a role there. Regarding local content, we have local news sections in Google News, and those sections are created by figuring out, given a local geography, having an understanding of what the cities in that area are, what are the sources in that area, and also and populating a section for you. So on the Google News homepage, you could create your own San Francisco section or Boston section or something smaller. And we've started rolling this out in other countries. So Germany is something that we launched recently, and there'll be other international versions of local news coming out.
Hi, I'm Peggy Gershman from Kaiser Health News. I'm wondering about the freshness aspect, because I noticed that AP especially will constantly republish a story that looks astonishingly similar to the one that they published as long as 12 or 14 hours ago. And it's still coming up on top as new, including if it's not. And then I noticed that when you sort by date or even time, you're finding a lot of things that aren't necessarily major news organizations coming up, just because they posted in the last 30 seconds. So is there any way to stop that sort of gaming the system to pull it?
So,
should we just all participate?
On the one hand, the fact that this is a restricted collection consisting of more reputable sources than the average website allows us to be a little bit more trusting. But at the same time, it is the case that some organizations could deliberately game this because it's such a small set of sources. If we notice a pattern, that's not going to help them in the long run. So it's easy to find these cases. But that said, sort by date is not a very common use case. Most people don't do sort by date. The most commonly is sort by relevance. And sort by relevance, there are a bunch of other factors having to do with reputation that also play a role there. And we pay attention, at least in headlines ranking, to the way the story has been developing. So if we notice very little activity in the story, we feel very comfortable backing off to a reputable older article, an older article from a reputable source, and if the story is rapidly developing, then chances are, in addition to the person who's trying to game it, there are reputable sources publishing. So in both cases, I think it works out, but obviously it could be better, and we are trying to operate in a model that is fairly trusting, and if we notice abuse, we'll take action.
Okay. Hello, I'm Ann MC from Colorado Public News. If 80% of people are coming to news sites from search, is it really that important to be constantly updating your page? And if the answer to that is yes, then is there any way that in-depth and investigative reporting is going to get picked up?
I don't think 80% of people are coming from search, firstly, and I think it's more like 50-50. But regardless, I think I didn't quite understand the question about constantly updating your page. You mean your headlines page, your home page?
The conventional wisdom is that news sites have to constantly update to get people to come back to the site. But if they're not coming to the site, they're coming through search. Is that really important?
Go ahead.
Well, if they're coming through, even if they start from the Google homepage, if they're seeing that the news vertical result, that has to go through the Google News algorithm that Krishna's been discussing. So yes, the freshness would be very key. If you're talking about people coming through the standard search result, then you're going to get results that are much older, typically, often 2 days old and things like that. So that would be something that would make sense to invest in, sort of the long-term, ongoing. Someone searching for cancer prevention, it's not a breaking news story, but you probably have content on your site that speaks to that. So organic search, web search would be a great pathway for that type of content. Does that answer the question or address it?
And just to be clear, we do pay attention to where your content ranks on your front page as well. So updating your front page is a way of cluing us about what you consider to be important. And obviously, if it's fresh, we pay attention to the fact that you've reported something freshly. Let me address the second point about investigative journalism, which is obviously, clearly, if you're the only person reporting on something and everybody else is reporting on the news of the day, it isn't. You won't show up on the front page based on what I just described. So we're conscious of that problem, and we've started taking some steps in that direction. We have a new section called Spotlight, just trying to find content that might be slightly older, but represents sort of unique journalism. It could be investigative, it could be influential opinion pieces and so forth, and trying to call attention to that. There's a lot more work to be done in trying to surface content that doesn't have a cluster around it. And also, of course, in search, the reputation of the source matters. So if, let's say The Economist puts out a very influential article, the fact that there's a lot of links to it, the fact that it's The Economist, makes a big difference, even if it's not very fresh.
If I can follow up on that, let's take an example, say a salmonella outbreak in a town. Now if you search for like salmonella in the name of that town, you probably get 8 copies of the AP story in 8 different news organizations. And the best story about it that's in depth might come from one news organization, and it might be number 11 on the list because it was done once in 24 hours for a newspaper, and I'm wondering if there's any way your search engines are dealing with that.
Yeah, so I think that this comes down to paying attention to how search engines operate. So just because you wrote the wonderful piece 11 hours ago, doesn't necessarily mean that after 11 hours you're still going to be at the top. So it's a good idea to update your website with new developments and so forth, because clearly if the story is a breaking story, it will have new developments. So it's valuable to keep your website fresh, even if you happen to be a highly authoritative source that has done a lot of work.
But I think it's also valuable to keep it archived on your site and not lose it, because then web search has a better chance of finding it and picking it up and giving it the authority that you want it to have.
We probably have time for 2, maybe 3 more questions, so be succinct, please.
Hi, I'm Ludovic Sabot from Relax News. I would like to know, how do you define, a high authority site, and how do you determine, do you measure the quality of a source of information? I mean, it can be very obvious for very famous newspapers or news agency, such as AP, AFP, Reuters. But how do you do, for example, because there are many relevant sources of information in remote countries, so how do you do to identify the relevant sources? Do you have teams who identify and every month or regularly who make kind of investigation of the sources? How do you do that?
For Google News, we pay attention to 3 signals. It's all automatic in general. And lastly, we look at what our users do in response to that source. So in other words, would they click on it more frequently than they would click on a comparable other source in that section? If it constantly finds, if we find that they're clicking on a particular source because that is highly reputable, then that filters into our signal as well. So we look at whether you are producing original content that is worth linking to, whether users like you, and whether in terms of the web search signals that we measure with the reputation as source, that you have a good reputation.
And I think that speaks to the importance of optimizing your site for organic search, because that's one of the factors that he's talking about for Google News.
One more question.
My name is Paul Bucci. I'm with the Vancouver Sun. We have a very diverse market. We serve a couple million people, and about 40% of them don't speak English. And so, we've experimented a little bit with streaming our website in other languages, principally Chinese. And I'm wondering, do you, in terms of news search, pick up mechanically translated articles? Like, is that part of your search? And if so, are there any great news organizations out there that are doing something like that?
I'm not aware of any news site that's putting out mechanically translated news, but human translated news, I'm sure, exists in a variety of places. I'm sure, for example, the BBC and the New York Times produce local content, translated content for other parts of the world. But I'm not sure. Are you suggesting that we should translate it?
No, I'm wondering if it's of interest to Google. Like, in terms of, I suppose it would speak to your quality. It would be fairly poor quality if it's mechanically
No, we already have translation technology,
right.
So we are happy to have users deliberately say translate from Arabic to English, knowing fully well it's machine translation and it's not perfect. It makes me very nervous if somebody would put it out and say that's accurate, because it may not be.
All right, I know that there are lots more questions. I have 2 quick questions. Who here is a student in college right now? Young lady, you were the first hand I saw. Can you hang on one second? Who here is from outside of the United States? And I saw your hand first. You both Jennifer and Gradiva have a copy of the book for you, which you just won. I think they'll be around to ask questions afterwards. We apologize. The room scheduling's tight. But thank you very much, and we'll see you later.